Today's story is called The Quiet Rainfall That Softened Mr. Ellis's Heart. Welcome to Warm Life Stories, a quiet little corner where we slow down, breathe a little easier, and share gentle stories about ordinary people, living ordinary days, that somehow still touch the heart. If you enjoy quiet stories like this, feel free to subscribe or share your thoughts in the comments. We always love reading them. Now, if you're ready, let's settle in and gently step into today's story. It was the kind of afternoon that didn't ask anything from anyone, quiet, gray, almost shy in the way it settled over the neighborhood. A thin curtain of rain fell softly across Mr. Ellis's porch, each drop landing with a delicate sound, like fingertips tapping gently on old wood. The world seemed to move slower beneath that rain, as if everything, chairs, leaves, memories, had agreed to pause for a moment. The air carried that familiar scent that comes just before a calm rain takes hold, a mix of cool earth and something nearly sweet, something that reminded him of earlier years he didn't often speak about. The porch railing, darkened by the dampness, seemed smoother to the touch. Even the wind had quieted down, as though it didn't wish to disturb the softness unfolding across the afternoon. Mr. Ellis sat in his usual spot on the right side of the porch, the same place he had chosen for nearly 7 years now. The seat had molded itself to him in a way, its old cushion sloping gently, its wooden frame creaking in a way that felt almost comforting. In his hands was the chipped mug he used every day, the one Maggie had loved. His thumb traced the small crack near the handle the way it always did, circling it slowly, as if following the outline of a memory. He lifted the mug, breathing in the gentle warmth of his tea. The rising steam curled upward and faded quietly into the cool air. For a moment, it looked like something drifting away, like a thought that had lingered too long. Rain began tapping against the tin roof above him, slow at first, then steadier, still soft enough that it never broke the peaceful rhythm of the porch. The rain made everything blur just a little. The yard, the maple tree, the gravel walkway out front. Edges softened, colors deepened, even time seemed to loosen its grip. It was on afternoons like this that Mr. Ellis felt the world speaking in a quieter language, one made not of words, but of small moments that pressed gently on the heart. He didn't always know what those moments were trying to say. He only knew they made him breathe a little deeper, sit a little stiller, listen a little closer. He leaned back against the wooden chair and listened to the rhythm of the rain, soft, steady, unhurried. It reminded him of pages turning in an old book, or footsteps in a house he once knew well, or the quiet humming Maggie used to make when she thought no one was listening. There was a stillness around him that felt alive, almost tender, the kind of stillness that holds its own warmth, even on a cool, rainy day. Water pooled at the edge of the porch, catching small reflections of the gray sky overhead. Every now and then, a raindrop would fall from the roof and ripple the water in a pattern that disappeared as gently as it arrived. A breeze drifted through, brushing lightly across his sweater. Not cold, just enough to make him notice the world around him again. It stirred a faint rustle in the rose bushes Maggie had planted years ago. Their leaves trembled under the weight of the rain, bending but never breaking. From somewhere down the street came the soft laughter of children splashing through puddles. The sound traveled lightly, softened by distance and weather, blending into the rain's rhythm like a note tucked quietly into a familiar song. Mr. Ellis closed his eyes for a moment. The rain wasn't loud enough to drown out thought, nor quiet enough to disappear into silence. It found a place in between where memories could rise without overwhelming him, and where loneliness felt just a little less sharp. He opened his eyes and watched the rain roll down the porch steps, forming thin streams that curved their way into the yard. Each drop followed its own small path, meeting others, joining, parting, drifting toward places unseen. He wondered, briefly, if hearts moved the same way, finding new paths when they needed to, softening only when something gentle touched them. And then, a subtle thought came, not quite a memory, not quite a feeling, just a whisper inside him. Something is shifting today. The rain kept falling, steady and unbothered. And in its quiet persistence, something inside Mr. Ellis softened too, though he didn't yet know how, or why, or where it would lead. The rain had settled into a steady rhythm by the time Mr. Ellis shifted slightly in his chair. He adjusted his glasses, an old habit when his thoughts wandered farther than he expected. The soft gray light fell across his face, revealing lines shaped not by hardship, but by years of quiet living, years of routine, years of loving someone deeply, and then learning to live without her. Harold Benjamin Ellis, though no one had called him Harold in decades, was a man of gentle patterns. At 74, he moved with deliberate steadiness, the kind that comes from knowing there is no need to rush. His frame was thin, slightly stooped, wrapped in a familiar cardigan he wore through every season except summer. A soft, worn piece of clothing that seemed to hold warmth better than his own body could these days. To the neighbors, he was simply Mr. Ellis, the man who waved from the porch every morning, who tended a modest rose bush with surprising devotion, and who always had a quiet kindness resting behind his blue-gray eyes. Children in the neighborhood rarely feared him. Instead, they approached him with the natural ease usually reserved for grandparents. Something about his stillness felt safe. Inside his house, small, wooden, and built in the 1960 seconds, everything held a story. The old jazz radio on the corner table, the toolbox beside the doorway, the drawer of letters he kept closed but never locked, and the two chairs on the porch, one for him and one that had belonged to someone who no longer sat there. Maggie. Her name moved through his thoughts like a warm breeze crossing a quiet room. Not painful, not heavy. Just present, always present. She had been gone 7 years, but the house still felt arranged around her, her humming, her patience, her gentle insistence that small things mattered. Mr. Ellis had learned to move through life without her, but he hadn't quite learned how to stop waiting for moments she would have loved. He took another slow sip from the chipped mug she once favored. A small crack curved along the handle like a fine line in old porcelain, beautiful in its imperfection. He touched it as though greeting an old friend, tracing the familiar path with his thumb. It was the kind of gesture that meant more than he would ever say aloud. Beyond the porch, across the low wooden fence, lived Mrs. Harper. If Mr. Ellis was the neighborhood's stillness, she was its cheerful breeze. She was 72, full of gentle chatter, and had a habit of stopping by with a bowl of soup or a story she insisted he needed to hear. She waved every morning and pretended not to notice when he struggled to wave back on the days he felt quieter than usual. Then there was Tommy, the 10-year-old, with 2 big sneakers and a laugh that carried down the street like a skipping stone across water. Tommy visited often, bringing questions about school projects, broken toys, or life in general. Somewhere along the way, without anyone naming it, Mr. Ellis had become something like a grandfather to him. The boy filled the empty spaces of the porch with a kind of brightness that didn't demand anything from the older man. It simply existed, easy and warm. And of course, Toby, the small stray cat who had chosen Mr. Ellis over the rest of the neighborhood. Toby approached no one else, not even children. But he curled at Mr. Ellis's feet in the evenings as naturally as rain collects in the low corners of a yard. Today, though, Toby was hiding somewhere from the rain, leaving the porch a little quieter than usual. These people, Mrs. Harper, Tommy, the mailman Mr. Clark, even Toby, were threads in the quiet fabric of Mr. Ellis's life. None of them intruded. None of them tried to fill the absence of the woman he loved. They simply lived around him, offering small points of connection he hadn't yet allowed himself to fully feel. As he watched the rain roll down the path, he thought briefly of how life had narrowed itself into gentle routines, not unhappy ones, just contained, predictable, safe. But something about the way the afternoon settled, the cool air, the softened edges of the world, the rhythm of falling rain made him feel as though the day held a quiet invitation, a small nudge, a whisper that said life could still surprise him, even now. He didn't know yet that the rain would carry more than just water to the ground. It would bring a moment simple, ordinary, but powerful enough to shift something inside him. And it would begin sooner than he expected. The rain often stirred memories in Mr. Ellis, soft ones, the kind that rose slowly, like steam lifting from a warm cup on a cool morning. He didn't resist them, he simply let them come. the way one might let a quiet song drift into a room. As he watched the raindrops gather along the porch railing, another time, another afternoon unfolded gently in his mind. It had been years ago, but the memory remained so clear he could almost feel the warm weight of it settling beside him. Maggie had always loved rainy days. Not storms, not downpours, just the quiet kind. The steady gray drizzle that made the world shrink in the gentlest way. She used to say rain softened everything. The air, the ground, even people. He hadn't understood what she meant back then. He only knew she looked peaceful when the sky dimmed and the porch grew cool. In his memory, she sat in the left-hand chair, the chair that now sat empty beside him. She wore her blue cardigan, the one with sleeves slightly too long. Her hair, streaked with early silver, curled at the ends in the moisture. She hummed under her breath, not a tune he ever recognized, but one he always felt. She called it, "Something the Rain Teaches Me." He never questioned it. Some things were meant to be felt, not explained. He could still picture how she held her mug with both hands, lifting it slowly as if not to disturb the quiet around her. And she would look toward the maple tree, watching water collect on its leaves until they dipped, then lifted, then dipped again like the tree was breathing with the rain. A faint smile crossed his face at the memory. It wasn't painful, just tender. Another layer of memory rose, this one older, from a time when he and Maggie had been much younger, just starting their life in this very house. They hadn't owned much then: a second-hand couch, a mismatched set of dishes, 2 lawn chairs borrowed from her brother. But they had the porch, and they had each other, and on a rainy afternoon they felt like enough. He remembered that day vividly. The rain had begun suddenly, tapping lightly against the window. Maggie ran to the porch with the kind of enthusiasm she reserved for small joys. She held out her hand, letting a raindrop land on her palm. "See?" she said, as if the drop itself held a message. He had laughed then, not because he understood, but because she made everything look like a gift. She stepped closer and whispered, "I hope we never grow too old to feel something this simple." And he had promised quietly, sincerely, that they wouldn't. He didn't know then how time could change the shape of a heart, how absence could stretch a moment into a memory, and a memory into a kind of longing that never entirely left. But even now, sitting alone on the porch, he felt that promise flicker inside him, not as regret, but as a gentle echo of who they had been. Another memory surfaced, this one small but warm, the two of them patching the porch roof during a light drizzle. They kept stopping to listen to the rain. The work took twice as long as it needed to, but neither complained. They just talked about nothing, about everything, while raindrops tapped overhead like a friendly reminder that the world could be both simple and beautiful. Mr. Ellis blinked, returning to the present as the actual rain continued to fall. The porch before him blurred just slightly with moisture and memory. He breathed in slowly, letting the cool air settle in his chest. It struck him how the house had held so many years, so many quiet afternoons, so many small rituals that had shaped the rhythm of their life together. Even now, the echoes of those moments lingered in the walls, the floorboards, the empty chair beside him. He wasn't haunted by these memories. If anything, they steadied him. Still, as he stared at that empty chair, a small weight pressed gently against the quiet of the afternoon. It wasn't sorrow, it was the recognition of something unfinished, something unsaid, something waiting. And the rain, soft, persistent, familiar, seemed to lean closer, as if encouraging the memory to rise, just a little more. Because something in this afternoon felt different. The past was close, but so was something new. He could sense it just beyond the edge of the rain. The rain began to shift, still gentle, still steady, but fuller now, as though the sky had decided to speak in a slightly clearer voice. Drops fell in long silver lines, sliding down the porch's edge and gathering into small, wandering streams that traced their way across the yard. Mr. Ellis reached for his mug again, but his hand paused halfway. Something had caught his attention, not a sound, really, but the absence of one. The children who had been laughing earlier had gone inside. The street grew quieter, even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Then came a soft patter of footsteps. They were quick, light, and a bit uneven, the unmistakable sound of someone small trying to outrun the rain. A moment later, Tommy appeared at the porch steps, hair damp, jacket unzipped, sneakers speckled with mud. He pushed back a wet curl from his forehead and looked up at Mr. Ellis with a grin that didn't seem to notice the weather at all. "Hi, Mr. Ellis," he said, slightly out of breath. Mr. Ellis blinked, surprised but not displeased. "Afternoon, kid, you'll catch a chill out there." Tommy shrugged, climbing onto the porch. "Mom says the same thing, but I just wanted to show you something." He held out his hand. Resting on his palm was a single leaf, thin, green, torn near the edge from the rain. A small raindrop clung to its surface, trembling as Tommy shifted his weight. "It fell from the tree," Tommy said. "Do you think it can be fixed? You're good at fixing things." Mr. Ellis felt something stir inside his chest, a quiet tug, gentle but insistent. He wasn't sure whether it came from Tommy's trust or from the simplicity of the question. Maybe both. He took the leaf carefully between his fingers. It was delicate, softer than he expected, the tear running just far enough to make it look wounded but not broken. "Well," he said slowly, "some things don't need fixing. They just need someone to look at them kindly." Tommy nodded, as if this answer made perfect sense. He sat down on the edge of the porch, legs dangling. His sneakers tapped the wooden boards in a rhythm that blended easily with the rain. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The boy stared out into the yard, watching thin sheets of rain drift across the grass. Mr. Ellis watched, the boy watched, the quiet ease he brought into the space, the innocence that didn't press, didn't pry, didn't ask for more than what was freely given. "You like the rain?" Tommy asked suddenly. Mr. Ellis exhaled softly. "I used to," he admitted, "a long time ago." "Why'd you stop?" The question wasn't meant to be heavy, but it landed somewhere deep. Mr. Ellis looked at the empty chair beside him. "Sometimes," he said, "you lose the person you shared things with, and it makes those things feel different." Tommy didn't interrupt. He didn't look away. He simply listened quietly, respectfully, the way children do when they know a moment holds something gentle. A breeze swept across the porch, lifting the corner of Mr. Ellis's worn notebook. Its pages fluttered open to a half-finished entry, a sentence he had written months ago but never completed. He reached for it, but Tommy spoke first. "What's it say?" Mr. Ellis hesitated, then read aloud quietly. "Some afternoons feel like they're trying to tell me something, but I'm not sure I know how to listen anymore." Tommy thought for a long moment. Then he said, softly, "Maybe today's trying again." The words settled into Mr. Ellis with unexpected ease. Not sharp, not intrusive, just honest. And in their honesty, something inside him loosened, just a little, just enough. He looked back toward the yard. The rain was still falling, but it felt different, closer, warmer, almost familiar. Tommy scooted a little nearer, bumping his shoulder lightly against the older man's arm. Not to comfort him, not to solve anything, just to share the space. It was such a small gesture. But small gestures, he realized, had shaped most of the best parts of his life. The rain, the leaf, the boy beside him, each seemed to carry a quiet message, a reminder that he wasn't as alone as he sometimes believed. A reminder that softness could return, even after long seasons of quiet. And as he sat there with Tommy, listening to the rain hum its gentle rhythm, he felt something shift inside him again, deeper this time. Something was waking. Something he thought he had set aside forever. A soft gust of wind drifted across the porch, carrying with it the faint scent of rain-soaked earth. It brushed gently against Mr. Ellis's sweater and stirred the loose pages of his notebook again, this time flipping them farther back, past lists, sketches, little notes he had written on slow evenings. The pages rustled like a quiet whisper, as if urging him to notice something he had nearly forgotten. Tommy leaned closer, curious. "Did you write a lot in there?" "A bit," Mr. Ellis said, though the truth was more complicated. He wrote when the world felt heavy. He wrote when memories pressed too hard to carry in silence. And sometimes, he wrote when he missed Maggie so deeply he couldn't hold the feeling inside any longer. The breeze fluttered one more page open, revealing something tucked neatly between the sheets. A pressed flower. Small, delicate, faded at the edges but still holding the faintest blush of its old color. A wildflower one Maggie used to pick from the edge of the walking trail behind their house. He hadn't seen it in years. He had forgotten he'd ever placed it there. For a moment, the world around him seemed to soften, the rain, the air, even the gray light. The pressed petals lay so still against the page, as though time itself had chosen not to disturb them. Tommy's eyes widened. "Whoa, did you keep that from a long time ago?" Mr. Ellis swallowed gently. "Yes. Maggie gave it to me on a spring afternoon. Said it reminded her of how simple days can hold the sweetest moments." He touched the fragile stem with a careful fingertip. The memory rose quietly, Maggie pressing the flower between book pages, laughing as she said, "Let's save this one. It'll be nice to find someday." Back then, he had thought she meant the next week, or the next month. He didn't realize she meant a day like this, a day when the world felt muted and tender, offering space for an old memory to breathe again. Tommy leaned his elbows on his knees. "She must have been really nice." "She was," Mr. Ellis said, his voice warm but steady. "She saw beauty where most people didn't look, even in small things." The boy nodded, thoughtful in a way children sometimes surprise adults with. "What if you find other things she saved?" he suggested. "Maybe she left more quiet surprises." Mr. Ellis smiled softly, not at the idea of more mementos, but at the innocence behind the words. That gentle faith, that life still held small gifts, waiting to be found. He lifted the pressed flower carefully from the notebook. As he did, a faint imprint of its shape remained on the page, a pale silhouette, delicate as breath. The sight caught him off guard. Something about it felt symbolic, though he didn't try to name the feeling. He just let it sit with him. "Funny," he murmured. "I must have passed this page 100 times and never saw it." Tommy tilted his head. "Maybe you weren't supposed to find it until today." The suggestion was simple, almost playful, but it landed with unexpected truth. Maybe some things really did arrive when the heart was ready, not when the mind was looking. Mr. Ellis placed the flower back between the pages, smoothing it gently as if tucking in a child for sleep. The rain softened again outside, its rhythm lighter, more delicate. It felt almost as though the afternoon was easing its grip, giving him room to breathe a little deeper. Tommy shifted closer, lowering his voice as if sharing a secret. "My mom says small things matter more on rainy days. 'Cause you notice them better." Mr. Ellis nodded slowly. That sounds like something Maggie would have said. The two of them sat there in a comfortable hush, the kind that didn't need filling. The pressed flower lay between them on the page like a bridge, quiet, unassuming, yet carrying so much of what had once been precious. And for the first time in a very long while, Mr. Ellis felt not just the memory of Maggie, but her presence, soft, familiar, almost near. Not as a weight, not as a loss, but as a gentle reminder that love doesn't vanish. It settles into small places, waiting for a moment like this one. For a long moment, the pressed flower lay open on Mr. Ellis's lap, its gentle outline resting against the soft, cream-colored paper. The rain continued its quiet rhythm, not heavy, not fading, just steady enough to feel like a companion rather than a sound. Tommy sat quietly beside him, swinging his feet with a slow, thoughtful rhythm, as if even he sensed the afternoon had settled into something tender. Mr. Ellis closed the notebook halfway, letting the pages meet with a soft whisper. His hand lingered on the cover, palm warm against the worn texture. He looked out into the yard again, where the rain had softened everything it touched. The maple tree seemed less rigid, the grass bent in graceful arcs. The air carried that faint shimmer that happens only when the world slows down enough to reflect its own gentleness. He drew in a slow breath. Something inside him shifted, subtle at first, like the loosening of a knot he didn't realize had tightened over the years. He placed the notebook on the small table beside him and stared at the empty porch chair, Maggie's chair. For years, he had tried not to look at it too long. Not because it hurt, but because it reminded him of a part of life he believed was closed. But now, the sight of the chair felt different, softer, less like a reminder of absence, more like a space still holding warmth. Tommy followed his gaze. Was that her seat? Mr. Ellis nodded. Yes, She liked sitting where she could watch the rain hit the yard first. "It looks like a nice place to sit," Tommy said. "Feels calm." Calm. Yes, that was it. Calm, not empty. Mr. Ellis let that single word settle inside him. He reached forward and, almost without thinking, slid the empty chair just a little closer to his own. The wood scraped lightly against the porch boards, a small sound, but it seemed to echo into the quiet afternoon. Tommy nudged him gently with an elbow. "Why'd you move it?" Mr. Ellis didn't have a perfect answer, but he found himself smiling softly, the kind of smile that comes from recognizing something true rather than something happy. "I think," he said slowly, "I wanted it to feel not so far away today." Tommy nodded with the simple understanding children possess, the kind that doesn't question emotions, just accepts them. A warm breeze followed, brushing across both of them, lifting the corner of the porch curtain. It carried the faint scent of the roses Maggie had planted. Even in the rain, they managed to release a little sweetness into the air. Mr. Ellis closed his eyes briefly, letting that scent wrap around him like a familiar embrace. When he opened them again, the world felt lighter. Not changed entirely, just softened at the edges, as though his heart had lifted itself slightly from the place it had settled too deeply. Tommy shifted closer, resting his shoulder against the older man's arm. It wasn't an act of comfort, it was simply connection, quiet and steady. The kind of closeness that didn't replace anything, didn't fix anything, but allowed space for healing to settle in naturally. "You okay, Mr. Ellis?" Tommy asked in a voice low enough to match the afternoon's softness. "Yes," Mr. Ellis said, and he meant it. "I think I'm doing better." He looked down at his hands, still warm from holding the pressed flower. He felt steadier somehow, more open, as though the very act of remembering, really remembering, had loosened something inside him that grief had kept tucked away. The rain shifted again, turning lighter, almost delicate. Each drop landed like a soft punctuation mark, gentle but sure. It felt as if the sky was exhaling with him. Mr. Ellis leaned back in his chair. For the first time in years, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt shared. He glanced once more at Maggie's chair, now sitting just inches closer, and felt a small, grateful warmth rise in his chest. Maybe healing didn't arrive all at once. Maybe it came in the form of small gestures, of a boy bringing a torn leaf, of a breeze revealing an old flower, of a memory stepping forward without pain. And maybe, just maybe, it came in the soft rainfall of an ordinary afternoon. By late afternoon, the rain had softened into a light drizzle, the kind that hung in the air like a gentle mist, rather than falling in drops. The sky brightened just slightly enough for a muted glow to spread across the porch, warming the wooden floorboards and making the small puddles shimmer like glass. Tommy stretched his legs and stood, brushing off his damp sleeves. "Mom's probably waiting," he said with a grin. "But I'll come back tomorrow. Maybe we can look at more of your notebook. It's read." "You're welcome anytime," Mr. Ellis replied, surprised by how natural the words felt as they left him. Not forced, not polite, true. The boy bounded down the porch steps, splashing through the thin layer of water that ran along the walkway. He turned once more before heading home, waving enthusiastically from the bottom of the path. Mr. Ellis lifted his hand in return, slow, steady, but somehow lighter than most waves he'd given in years. When Tommy disappeared around the corner, the porch grew quiet again. But it was a different kind of quiet, softer, friendly, a quiet that didn't press on him the way it sometimes did. He leaned back in his chair, letting his shoulders relax as he listened to the drizzle. The empty chair beside him, Maggie's chair, still sat just a little closer. Strange how such a small movement could change the feel of the whole porch. It didn't feel like a relic now. It felt included. After a few breaths, Mr. Ellis stood up. His knees stiffened briefly, but the motion was familiar, manageable. He stepped toward the edge of the porch and looked out over the yard. Rain clung to every leaf of the rose bushes Maggie had planted, turning each petal into a tiny mirror for the gray sky. He walked down the steps slowly, letting the drizzle settle softly on his cardigan. The roses looked peaceful, more alive in the rain than they ever seemed on bright days. He reached out and touched one of the leaves. A droplet slid down and clung briefly to the tip of his finger before falling to the soil below. "You always liked them best after the rain," he murmured, half to the memory of Maggie, half to the quiet itself. He stayed there for a moment, simply breathing. The damp earth smelled fresh, almost sweet. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked twice. A car door closed. Everyday sounds, ordinary sounds, but today they felt more connected to him somehow, as though he wasn't standing apart from the world but gently within it. He returned to the porch and picked up the notebook from the small table. Instead of closing it, he opened it to a blank page. The rain had cooled his hands, but the page felt warm under his fingertips. He didn't rush. He simply let the moment settle, then wrote a single line. Today felt different. And that. He paused, reread the words, and smiled. It wasn't poetic, it wasn't profound, but it was true. A quiet breeze drifted through the porch again, lifting the thin curtain and carrying a faint hint of the neighborhood's evening scents: warm soup from someone's kitchen, a bit of laundry scent from a nearby window, the earthy freshness of rain-soaked ground. It felt like the world was breathing around him. For the first time in a long time, he let himself open the window behind his chair. The hinges creaked softly. It had been a while since he'd opened it, but the air that flowed in felt new, clean, promising. He returned to his seat, placing the notebook on his lap. He didn't close it, didn't tuck it away. Instead, he simply rested his hand on it, letting the open pages face the quiet world ahead of him. The day was nearing its end, but it didn't feel like something closing. It felt like something easing open. The rain began to taper off completely, leaving only the occasional drop slipping from the edge of the roof and landing with a soft tap on the steps below. The sound was steady, soothing, like a final note in a gentle song. Mr. Ellis breathed in deeply, letting the cool air fill his chest. He felt lighter, not changed entirely, but softened, just enough. And as the evening drifted in soft, calm, unhurried, he found himself ready for it, more ready than he had been in years. Evening eased itself over the neighborhood, the way a soft blanket might settle across tired shoulders, slow, warm, familiar. The drizzle had faded completely now, leaving the air washed clean and carrying the faint sparkle that comes after a long, gentle rain. The sky, still pale gray, held on to the last traces of daylight, as if reluctant to let go. Mr. Ellis stayed on the porch, leaning back in his chair, notebook resting open in his lap. He didn't write anything more. He didn't need to. The single line he had added, "Today felt different," seemed to hold more truth than anything else he could have tried to put into words. He watched as small droplets slid from the porch roof, falling in occasional, irregular taps onto the stone step below. One by one, slow, patient. They created tiny ripples that faded almost as soon as they formed little circles of movement, dissolving back into stillness. He found himself matching his breathing to their rhythm. A soft glow lit up from Mrs. Harper's kitchen across the fence. He could faintly hear the sound of her setting dishes on her table, steady, homey, comforting. Farther down the street, someone turned on a porch light, casting a warm, golden beam across the sidewalk. The world felt gentler in these early evening rituals, as if every home held its own small warmth against the dimming sky. Mr. Ellis glanced at Maggie's chair again. The slight shift he'd made earlier was subtle, hardly noticeable unless one had been watching. But to him, it meant something: a quiet opening, a small invitation to let the world back in. The chair didn't look lonely now. It simply looked present, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. He let his gaze drift toward the rose bushes. Water clung to each petal like tiny jewels, reflecting the soft glow of the house lights. He imagined Maggie seeing them this way, how she would have smiled, how she would have said something simple but beautiful about the way rain helps flowers remember how to bloom. He felt her memory beside him, not as an ache but as a gentle, familiar warmth. For years he had carried his grief like a folded letter, kept in a pocket, always with him, always close, edges worn from being handled too often. But today, the edges felt smoother, softer, as though the rain had pressed them flat again, making room for other things to fit alongside. He looked down at the notebook in his lap, his fingers resting lightly on the cover. The pressed flower inside remained tucked safely between its pages, He didn't open it again, but knowing it was there brought a quiet sense of comfort. Some things didn't disappear. They simply waited for the right moment to be seen. A faint breeze drifted through the porch, carrying the coolness of evening with it. It brushed across his face, tugging gently at the corner of the notebook, and then moved on. It felt like a soft reminder that life was still moving slow, calm, steady, and he was still moving with it. He exhaled, long and deep. His chest felt lighter than it had all week, maybe all year. A thought formed slowly, like a whisper slipping into the quiet. Perhaps healing doesn't arrive in grand moments. Perhaps it comes in small ones, quiet afternoons, a torn leaf, a child's simple question, the soft rainfall of an ordinary day. He didn't say it aloud. He simply let the truth of it settle. The porch lights flickered on automatically, washing the wooden boards in a gentle gold. The glow reached the edge of Maggie's chair, warming it just enough that it no longer felt like a place abandoned by time. It looked lived in again, a part of the world instead of a relic of the past. Mr. Ellis closed his notebook, not with finality, but with calm intention. He held it against his chest briefly, feeling the faint weight of memory and possibility resting together inside. Tomorrow would come in its own quiet way, and he would meet it not with expectation, not with fear, but with the soft openness the rain had left behind. He looked once more at the yard, at the sky, at the chair beside him. Everything felt still. Everything felt gentle. Maybe that's how life returns, he thought. Not all at once, just softly enough that you hardly notice the moment your heart begins to open again. And with that small, steady warmth settling inside him, Mr. Ellis whispered into the quiet evening only to himself, only to the day that had changed him. Thank you. The night welcomed his words, holding them the way the rain had held the afternoon, with tenderness, with patience, with grace.